Ever turned a handmade garment inside out and cringed at what you saw? Those frayed, messy seams can make even the most carefully sewn piece look unfinished. What separates amateur work from results you feel proud of? It's all in how you handle those raw edges. And here's the thing, you don't need a serger to achieve that clean, polished look. I'm going to show you 5 seam finishing methods that work with any sewing machine to give you garments that look just as good on the inside as they do on the outside. Let's start with the simplest technique that most sewists overlook, pinked seams. To pink your seams, all you need to do is trim them with a pair of pinking shears. These special shears cut a zigzag along your seam line, which prevents fraying. Before we get into the how, let's talk about why this even matters. Loose threads aren't just messy. They're evidence that your fabric is slowly unraveling towards your seam line. Once that raveling reaches your stitching, your seam loses its grip on the fabric, leading to gaps, holes, or complete separation. Finished seams also prevent fraying threads from getting caught up in zippers or creating snags on other garments in your closet. If you've ever had loose threads work their way to the outside of a garment, proper seam finishing prevents that too. Think of seam finishing as insurance for your handmade clothes. It's what makes the difference between something that lasts one season and something you'll treasure for years. So how do pinking shears prevent this? Well, they're actually working with the science of fabric construction. When you cut a zigzag edge through woven fabric, you're essentially breaking the grid pattern that allows threads to pull out easily. Each little zigzag point anchors the threads around it, dramatically reducing fraying. Here's what you need to know. This only works on woven fabrics because of that grid-like weave structure. On knits, pinking shears are basically useless since knit fabrics don't fray the same way. When you're using pinking shears, don't just hack away at your seam allowances. Instead, cut with confident, smooth strokes, letting the blades do their work. You want clean, sharp points, not raggedy tears. Pinked seams shine on lighter weight, tightly woven fabrics like cotton lawn, silk, and crisp shirting. You'll get mixed results on thicker fabrics like denim or canvas. The bulk makes it harder to get clean cuts. And here's something that might surprise you. Looser wovens like rayon and linen will still fray even with pinking because those loose weaves just can't hold the zigzag pattern effectively. That's exactly why testing is so crucial with this technique. If threads start pulling out immediately after pinking, this method isn't right for that particular fabric. Those rayons and loosely woven linens I just mentioned are prime examples. They might look like good candidates for pinking, but they'll fool you every time. Don't force it when a fabric isn't cooperating. Move on to a different finishing method. If you're looking for the perfect project to try pinked seams, the Katiuska tank top would be a great choice. It's quick to sew, doesn't take much fabric, and works beautifully in those crisp woven fabrics pinked seams work best with. Using pinking shears would make this such a speedy sew. Or consider the reed dress. With its timeless shift silhouette and minimally complicated techniques, pinked seams would make this a quick and satisfying project. The key is choosing patterns without a lot of curved seams, since pinking works best on straight edges. Now let's talk about zigzag finishing, which is probably the most accessible technique since most modern machines can make a zigzag stitch. The secret to success with this method is testing first. Grab some scrap fabric and experiment with your zigzag width before touching your actual garment pieces. You're not trying to create decoration here. You're trying to lock down those raw edges just enough to prevent fraying. Start with a medium width and length, then adjust based on how your fabric responds. Here are a few troubleshooting tips that'll save you frustration. If your zigzag stitches are creating tunneling or puckering, try loosening your upper tension slightly. For stitch length, heavy fabrics usually need longer stitches, while delicate fabrics need shorter ones to prevent the stitches from pulling away at the edge. And if you're getting skip stitches, check that you're using a fresh needle that's appropriate for your fabric weight. Some machines also have what's called a faux overlock stitch, which basically mimics what a serger does. If your machine has this option, it's worth testing. It often gives a cleaner finish than a basic zigzag. The zigzag and faux overlock techniques work well for light to medium weight fabrics, though it can look a bit bulky on very fine fabrics. For heavyweight fabrics like canvas or denim, you might need to adjust your presser foot pressure to help the fabric feed evenly under the zigzag motion. One thing to note is that these stitches tend to eat up a lot of thread. To save a little money, you can use cone thread, which will give you a bigger bang for your buck. All you need is a thread holder. The Hansi top is perfect for practicing zigzag finishes. It's a woven tee with cut-on sleeves that's become a total wardrobe staple. Using zigzag stitch finishes would make this an even quicker sew. Or if you want to practice on something different, try the ollie tote in a sturdy canvas or denim. Zigzag finishes are perfect for bags where you need durability without the expense of a serger. French seams are essentially seams sewn twice, encasing the raw edge completely within the seam itself. The result is incredibly neat and delicate, perfect for lingerie, blouses, and anything where the inside might be visible. Think of it like creating a little fabric envelope around your raw edges. Here's how it works. Start by placing your fabric pieces wrong sides together. Yes, wrong sides, not right sides like usual. This trips up a lot of people because it feels backward. Sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, then trim that seam allowance in half. This trimming step is crucial. If you skip it, your finished seam will be too bulky. Press the seam flat to one side, then fold the fabric so the right sides are now together. Here's where the magic happens. Stitch again at 1/4 inch, which encases those raw edges completely inside the seam. Press to one side and you're done. One thing that catches beginners off guard is this. While you end up with a narrow seam, you still need 5/8 inch seam allowance to start. If you're working with a pattern that has narrower allowances, you can modify the technique by starting with 1/4 inch and finishing with 1/4 inch. Well, you need to take extra care to make sure the resulting seam is fully enclosed. French seams are ideal for sheer or lightweight fabrics where regular seam finishes might show through. They're also perfect for looser wovens like linen or rayon that tend to fray easily. That double stitching really locks everything in place. Just remember, French seams can create bulk with thicker fabrics, so save this technique for lighter weights. They also work best on straight seams like side seams. If you're using French seams on a garment that has curved seams like an armhole, you can combine finishes. For example, use a French seam on the side seams and underarm, but a bound seam along the armhole. The bow top is a wonderful option for French seams, especially if you're making it in a sheer fabric. That wide, breezy silhouette paired with elegant French seams creates something truly special. Or try them on the Joss pants. Using upgraded seam finishes on simple patterns is such an easy way to elevate your sewing and make garments feel more expensive. The relaxed fit of these patterns gives you room to work with a slightly bulkier seam. And if you want to become a French seam expert, our newest skills workshop launching soon covers everything from basic technique to advanced problem solving. The class will be available exclusively for members during December, then it opens for purchase January 1st. I've included the link in the description if you want to learn more. Now let's talk about one of my favorite finishes, flat felled seams. For situations where you need serious durability, flat felled seams are your answer. These are the seams you see on quality jeans and tailored shirts. Strong, sturdy, and built to last. They're more time consuming than other finishes, but worth it when you need that extra strength. The reason they're so durable is that the raw edges are completely enclosed and then top stitched down, creating essentially 3 layers of fabric at the seam line. Start with right sides together and sew at 5/8 inch. Now here's where it gets specific. Your pattern will tell you which direction to press the seam. This isn't arbitrary. It's usually based on the shape of the garment and how the seams will lay on the body. Let's say you're pressing toward the left. Trim the left seam allowance to half its original width. This creates a stepped effect that reduces bulk in the final seam. Press the seam toward the trimmed side, then fold the untrimmed allowance under so it wraps around the trimmed one. This is where precision really matters. You want that fold to just cover the raw edge without creating excess bulk. From the wrong side of the garment, edge stitch this fold in place. Use a zipper foot or edge guide to keep your stitching consistent. If traditional flat felled seams seem too fussy, try the faux version. Sew and trim just like before, but instead of folding and edge stitching, just zigzag the seam allowance and press it flat. Then from the right side, top stitch at 3/8 inch. You get that classic flat felled look with less work and slightly less bulk. This technique is particularly good for home sewists who want the appearance without all the pressing and precision work. Plus, it's still super strong. Here's another pro tip for flat felled seams. The top stitching thread doesn't have to match your garment fabric. On jeans, they often use a contrasting gold thread that becomes part of the design. Consider using a slightly heavier thread for top stitching to make the seams more prominent and durable. The Brooks skirt is perfect for practicing flat felled seams. Just like on classic jeans, you can use them on the back yoke, center back seam, and side seams. Or if you're feeling ambitious, the Audrey jacket actually calls for faux flat felled seams throughout the construction. It's built right into the pattern so you don't have to figure out the modifications yourself. For unlined garments where you want the inside to look as polished as the outside, bound seams and Hong Kong finishes are game changers. These techniques use bias tape to encase raw edges, creating a couture-level finish. Now, you might think these two methods are basically the same thing, but there's a subtle difference that completely changes how you approach them. A bound seam is completely enclosed by the bias binding, meaning both the front and back edges of the binding are turned under. With Hong Kong finishing, the underside of the binding strip is left raw to reduce bulk. To make a bound seam, start by cutting 1.5 inch bias strips to create double fold bias tape. Fold your strip in half and press, then fold each side in towards the center press line. Be sure to make one side of your fold about 1/8 inch shorter than the other. This will help you catch the underside of the binding when you stitch it down later. Unfold the edge on the shorter side, aligning it with your raw seam allowance, and sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance in the fold line you just pressed. Wrap the binding around the raw seam edge and pin the remaining folded edge in place on the wrong side of the seam. Carefully stitch in the ditch from the right side to secure the other side of the binding. The result completely encases those raw edges. For Hong Kong finishing, the binding on the wrong side isn't folded under, so your bias strips don't need to be as wide. Start with 1 inch bias strips. Sew one raw edge of your bias strip to the edge of your seam at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Press the bias strip away from the seam line and wrap the remaining raw edge around to the wrong side of the seam. Press again to flatten the raw binding edge, then pin in place and stitch in the ditch from the right side. The unfinished edge won't fray and won't be visible when seams are pressed open. When you're choosing between bound seams and Hong Kong finishing, consider the garment construction. If your pattern calls for seams to be pressed open, a Hong Kong finish is usually the better choice. The resulting seam is less bulky and lays flatter. If seams are pressed to one side, bound seams work beautifully to fully encase both layers of seam allowance. Both of these techniques are great for unlined coats and jackets. The indigo car coat would look stunning with bound seams. Imagine opening that coat and seeing perfectly finished seams instead of raw edges. Same with the ret jacket. I made mine with bound seams and it makes it feel really special. These techniques really shine on garments that are investment pieces where the extra time creates lasting value. The beauty of these seam finishing techniques is that you can choose the right one for each project. Each one serves a purpose, and mastering all 5 gives you incredible flexibility in your sewing. The real magic happens when you stop seeing these as separate techniques and start thinking of them as tools in your sewing toolkit. Just like you wouldn't use a hammer for every job, you don't need French seams on every garment. The goal isn't to use the fanciest technique possible. It's to choose the one that best serves your fabric, your timeline, and your vision for the finished garment. Once you master these seam finishes, you'll want to pair them with equally polished neckline treatments. And that's where technique really makes the difference between amateur and refined results. Watch this video next to discover the neckline finishing secrets that'll transform every garment you make.